This is a hard gig, isn't it, at the end of the day? But I'm going to do my very best. And contrary to what you just said, you guys are going to do the work and not me. And I'll explain that in a moment. So yes, I am Joanne Banks. Is that mic okay? And I'm a lecturer in special inclusive education, disability-related topics in the School of Education in Trinity College. And the work that underpins a lot of what we do in the school is around inclusivity. And I think as a backdrop to today and a lot of the talks and speakers that we've heard today, you can hear undertones of inclusion, access, and some specific reference to disability and students who might experience barriers to learning. A core area of what we do in the school is around universal design for learning and universal design more generally. So I'll probably touch on that a little bit as well. I think what we try and emphasise in our school is to try and highlight the idea of a one-size-fits-all curriculum, and how by having a curriculum like that, which we do and a lot of national systems do, we are excluding some students, okay? And what we like to probe and look at a little bit is around school exclusion, so students who are not in attendance. And I know there's people here today that are in alternative education settings and not like formal or mainstream education settings. Students who are in segregated or special education settings as well. Students who attend mainstream settings and perhaps are on short school days, are on reduced curriculum, where there's modifications made around their learning. And I think there's also a kind of another context to the rise of homeschooling and students who are simply at home, and statistics and understanding of that is quite unclear in Ireland at the moment as well. So in relation to what I'd like to contribute today, I just really enjoyed the talks from today. I've taken so much from it. I'm a little bit freaked out, I'm not going to lie. That's about the AI piece and the fact that I've got a teenage son who the other day was doing his homework at the kitchen table, and he asked for help. He had to do a diary entry of a character in his English book. And he said, "Can you help me?" And I was like, "Yep, no problem, I'll help." And do you have the book? And he was like, "No, I left it in school." I was like, "Okay." So I put into ChatGPT, I was like, "What happened in chapter 2 of the book?" And we read what happened in chapter 2, and it was all going really well. And then he was like, "Write a diary." And I was like, no, you can't ask for the answer in ChatGPT, but we asked for the actual chapter understanding in ChatGPT. So there in that live moment, I was like, okay, it's okay for one use, but when it comes to your understanding, meaning and learning of this character, I wasn't allowed. He did it in the end. I read it the next day, and it was beautifully written by ChatGPT. But somebody talked about friction and tension. This was an exact moment of that, and how to integrate meaning and understanding into his learning process. I wrote down a couple of notes from the research pieces that we had this afternoon that I thought might be helpful to just try and wrap up the learning, certainly that I got, and to try and draw some kind of similarities and differences between the papers. But I thought each of the pieces of research that we heard about were trying to address barriers to learning in a really, Siobhan, you mentioned about the kind of richness of the team, and that came out really strong. And I think in each of the characters, like Peter's presentation earlier on, heavy on research and empirical base for your understanding about student motivation. And what a subtle and kind of non-tangible thing to try and address, to try and understand retention rates in schools. And it made me think about our guidance provision and student decision making, and what kind of capital a student is bringing to the table to make those decisions about higher education access. So I found that really, really interesting. I also thought the other barrier that Helena and Keith were trying to address was the barrier about teacher capacity and the empowerment of teachers. And some kind of despondently, you're kind of wondering, have we disempowered teachers in recent years in applying an understanding of they need to know X and Y in order to teach, when they inherently, on qualification from Trinity College School of Education, know how to teach, and they become that practitioner. But it's quite a frustrating space for a lot of teachers, and there is a sense of overwhelm. So I thought that the kind of content creation and providing a scaffold in which they could do that in a free and accessible way for themselves then will feed into their capacity to teach their students. So I kind of took an awful lot from your presentation as well. I thought the community of practice piece from the presentation by Mary, I don't know if she's here, was really trying to address a sense of connection for students on and off campus, and the idea of an app or a piece of technology in which to bind, there you are, to kind of bind student understanding, connectivity and learning. And we know the research evidence shows that where peer relations are strong, where there's a sense of belonging, whether it's in a physical campus or in a digital form, that learning can take place, assessment is better, and completion rates are probably affected by that as well. So I thought that I really noticed that you had this kind of revision aspect to that piece of work where you continually went out, and it's a very universal design approach to go out and seek understanding, seek where there's complications with the technology, feed it back in, and just be always open for revision in the use of that tool. I was blown away by the keynote presentation today in relation to AI and sustainability, and excuse my ignorance, but I really hadn't explored that. And it was really interesting to hear about the international school space. I suppose I was reflecting on how different it is to the Irish education system and the kind of tortoise nature that it takes in terms of adapting to change. And that perhaps in this AI world that we live in, that this might be a benefit, and that we do have space still to pause and reflect on how we integrate that into our schools. And also then, as somebody who's quite interested in policy, the need for policy to act, and instead of devolving that at school and individual level, that there needs to be policy guidance for practitioners. And I notice here today that pretty much all the education sectors are present at this wonderful day, and I think that really resonated with everybody what she was talking about. There's a couple of themes that I thought ran through each of the presentations. One was about the expertise, the interdisciplinarity of the research and understanding around AI integration into the workplace, but also into education settings. I thought it was wonderful to see that research underpins a lot of AI technology, AI tools, and our understanding. And Learnovate can be really, I think, applauded for bringing in that expertise at practitioner level, the kind of academic voice, and the commercial side as well. We chatted at coffee or at lunch earlier on about the importance of process, and how, say, even with assessment and writing for students, that often it is the mistakes piece. It's that process part is where the learning takes place. So I thought that the formative assessment talk that you gave there, I thought it was really, really important to kind of platform that today, that's where the learning is. It's not actually in the outcome a lot of the time. And I think that the mistakes and spending time in that process, and for students who this is an overwhelm for them too, to be okay in that kind of being vulnerable in front of your classmates and your teacher, and it to be a kind of reciprocal shared learning space. So I really thought that was wonderful, and it came through lovely and strong in your presentation. David asked me to do predictions for the future, and I immediately thought, who am I to predict the future of Irish education or education systems more broadly? So I thought I would draw on your own expertise in this room. And I do have a Slido, if you wouldn't mind just putting it up. But I'd firstly like to ask you about the barriers that you see in the education system. And I know you mightn't be necessarily in classrooms, but you're here for a reason, right, at a learning day like this. So in your work context, if you could scan the QR and hopefully things will appear. So what are the barriers to learning? And I say formal, but in formal and alternative education settings. I'd love to hear your views. So we'll get a nice mix, I presume, of system barriers here, barriers that students themselves experience. And if anybody would like to speak to the points that they raise, please raise your hand, because I'd love an elaboration on some of these points, particularly things like choice paralysis. or outsized expectations. Does anybody want to comment on what they're posting? I know the anonymity is going to go, but we're all friends here. A lack of representation. Could I ask what that means? Yeah. Sorry.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Dirk from Grasshopper, which is just a STEM tool. And I talked yesterday to a teacher from UL, and her class is 900 students for statistics, so I put in class sizes.
Yes.
And so there's a major challenge how to, rather from university capacity or from housing capacity, to how to hold that, and yeah, so just to elaborate on class sizes.
Yeah, well, certainly the primary and post-primary school teachers won't disagree with the issue around class sizes as well. It's a major barrier to, I suppose, interaction and engagement in the classroom, and it ends up being this didactic form of education that people are trying to move away from. So yeah, thank you for that. Does anybody else want to comment? The state exams, I couldn't agree more. The exams are an axe that hangs over any innovative practice we do, pedagogical and otherwise, in the classroom. So I think there's going to be a lot of nodding heads there. Overworked students, hugely heavy curriculum to be delivered by teachers and then understood and absorbed by students. Yeah, if somebody would like to talk about the time the teachers have to implement tech and AI, I don't know who made that comment, but I'd love you to elaborate that a little bit more, because I think I mentioned there about universal design for learning, and in teaching universal design for learning, it can often be quite a positive experience for teachers, because in showing them the framework, you often are showing them that they're already doing vast amounts of really good inclusive practice. Whereas the understanding of AI implementation or tech implementation in the classroom can often be another thing that they have to do. Oh my goodness, hopelessness. Noise, development, lack of trust, lack of resources. And a lack of flexibility. And I suppose the curriculum itself is considered quite a barrier in student understanding and in enabling students to access it from where they're at. And part of what we do in the school is around students with additional learning needs and barriers to learning for whatever reason, but we do focus quite a bit on students with disabilities, and just the approach of the curriculum and schools more generally to those students is often to separate for instruction rather than integrate and include in classroom practice. So that's something that we kind of probe quite a bit. Okay, I really want to thank you for that. I think it's a really helpful thing, and we thought maybe that we'd keep these slides for Learnovation next year and just see how our ideas and our understandings of these kind of areas have changed. I'm just going to move on and hopefully to a more positive story and draw on your expertise for the next slide around what are the opportunities in our education system now, and particularly given the wonderful papers and talks that we heard today, and the genuine commitment, I suppose, to innovate and be innovative in educational approaches. Is it there? Yeah. And go off the top of your head with this stuff. You don't have to work within the confines of your workplace here, but what would you like to see? Can I ask the outdoor learning person to speak? Is this a bit cruel, me picking on people when they input it anonymously? Outdoor learning? No? An agile curriculum, that's lovely. More continuous assessment. So any UDL experts in the room will see what's appearing on the screen isn't necessarily in the UDL language, but it's pretty much the actual framework is appearing before our eyes, which is student autonomy, flexibility in their learning, real world examples and meaningful engagement with the curriculum rather than the curriculum being imposed upon the student. I'm going to throw the outdoor learning in there. I don't know if that's in the framework, but I like it a lot. And then using AI, using technology as an enhancement, and for somebody that works in the kind of special education space, for using it as a tool to level the playing field with peers and to create greater chances for inclusion. So what I'm reading from this page is that we really need humans in the AI loop, that we really need connectivity with our students, but equally we need connectivity from student to student. We need this curriculum itself to be a fluid process where co-creation of knowledge can take place, co-creations of say, formative assessments, that the kind of hierarchy between practitioner, educator and student is somewhat leveled. That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I might just finish by just discussing a little bit about universal design for learning in the Irish context. And I know Learnovation is certainly very familiar with universal design for learning and the impact it can have at the design stage of technologies as they're being developed and implemented. The idea behind universal design for learning, for you that haven't heard of it, although you appear to be very knowledgeable of it, perhaps not in exact terminology. And I suppose somebody described to me once is that you predict and you design and understand that there will be variability in whatever educational context that you work in. And you can anticipate this. The goal of universal design for learning is to teach the student how to learn and to create an autonomous learner, so no matter as they progress through their educational careers, that they have the tools and capacity in which to engage with the learning content. I think AI, as what I've learned from today, spooked as I might be, I think it can create greater autonomy for the student in terms of accessing information and knowledge, certainly from my own educational experience, which is very much book-based, to my 14-year-old son trying to do a diary entry of a character in his English book. I think you can see the engagement with the learning, but perhaps we need to just create that more meaningful, and that's where the human in the AI loop is important. Sometimes I discuss this with our own PME group in the school, is that it can be used as a platform where students might have struggled with perhaps formatting structural elements of essay writing or whatever it might be, to bring them closer to the critical space, which is our main goal, is that they have an ability to do critical analysis on a topic a little bit sooner, so that it can be used as a platform in that way to enhance their own learning experience. Working in a higher education institute, but also equally sitting at my kitchen table doing English homework with my son, I realised that the academic integrity is really challenged across the board, and this is a concern amongst institutions with the threat of plagiarism, particularly for students. And I think it will only shine a light, like COVID did. Somebody mentioned COVID earlier on, and the wonder that did for inclusive and UDL practices. But equally, in terms of our assessments, AI is going to shine a light on perhaps the fact that we need more innovative assessments, more meaningful engagement, and that process piece to be engaged with a little bit more authentically. I just want to finish on a charter, a kind of a national initiative that has happened over the last number of years. It's called the Altitude Charter for Universal Design. It's a tertiary education initiative that I believe could be very readily applied to early years, primary, post-primary and other education settings as well. So Altitude looks at inclusion from across the educational ecosystem. And the thing that appeals to me is today we very much focused on this particular day on the tech pillar. There's 4 pillars. Teaching and learning pillar, I feel like we're in, and we certainly work within, but in today you could see it spill over into both the teaching and learning pillar and the technological pillar. And we even mentioned the WCAG guidelines from Europe earlier on, which I thought was really, really interesting. There's 2 other pillars in relation to the Altitude Charter, and it really stems from the idea that inclusion just doesn't happen in a teaching and learning space. It happens when a young person walks into their school reception area and meets the school secretary and says hello to the caretaker, or has a fire drill, or whatever it might be. So there's the physical infrastructure of the building is a 3rd pillar, and then the 4th pillar is around student supports and services. So it's everything from the librarian to the IT person to the guidance counsellor that enables learning for that young person. And really what Altitude is trying to do is to create a cross-institutional collaboration where we implement this at a whole school or whole institutional level, so that the teacher, in their efforts to do more inclusive practices, aren't working in isolation, and that there's a system level structure in operation that is very much firmly based on inclusivity. So I just want to really thank you for all your wonderful research and talks today, and I'd love to thank the audience here for squeezing the last bits out of your brain after a long day of listening. Yeah, thanks a lot. Cheers.
So a huge thank you, Joanne, and thank you to all of our speakers this afternoon for their insights and inspiration. So that concludes the formal education track, a rethink track. Conversation doesn't end here. Please join us in the atrium for drinks and the drinks reception afterwards. And for the evening, thank you for being part of Learnovation 2025, and thank you for being such an attentive audience. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.